They sat alone, strapped to a metal chair, staring through thick glass, waiting for the gas to rise. No mercy, no escape, just the slow, silent arrival of death. Today, we're uncovering the haunting final moments of prisoners executed in the gas chamber, what they ate, what they said, and how it all ended inside a sealed, airless tomb. Donald Harding, Arizona. Donald Eugene Harding was born in 1949 in the United States. From an early age, his life was marked by instability. Reports later revealed that Harding spent much of his youth in institutions, reform schools, juvenile detention centers, and later, adult correctional facilities. By the time he reached adulthood, his life had already taken a sharply criminal turn. Harding's early offenses included burglary and theft, but over time his crimes escalated in violence and intensity. He became known to authorities across several states, having served time in prisons from Washington to California. But it was in Arizona where his name would be permanently etched into the record books, for reasons far more disturbing than theft. In 1980, Harding was released from prison in Washington state. Not long after, he began what law enforcement would later describe as a cross-state crime spree, marked by robberies, kidnappings, and ultimately, murder. It was during this period that Harding demonstrated a chilling disregard for human life. Authorities linked him to at least 6 homicides, though he was convicted for 2 in Arizona. On the night of January 25, 1980, Harding entered a Phoenix motel. There, he encountered 53-year-old hotel manager Robert Wise. According to prosecutors, Harding bound and gagged Wise, then brutally beat and shot him. Wise's body was found the next morning. Days later, Harding killed a second man, Ernest Avra, a disabled World War II veteran who operated a small shop in Tucson. Avra, too, had been restrained, robbed, and murdered. The methodical nature of both crimes shocked investigators. By the time he was apprehended, Harding's fingerprints and ballistic evidence had tied him to multiple killings. The brutality of his crimes, coupled with a lack of remorse, led prosecutors to pursue the death penalty. In 1982, Harding was convicted of multiple counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to die. He spent the next decade on Arizona's death row. But Harding was not content to fade quietly. During his time on death row, he filed repeated appeals and corresponded with journalists. According to those who interviewed him, Harding acknowledged his crimes, but he was firm in his belief that the justice system had shaped him. He saw himself not just as a criminal, but as a product of a system that had abandoned him long before he picked up a weapon. As his execution date approached, Harding made a fateful decision. He did not challenge the state's method of execution, the gas chamber. In fact, he embraced it. On April 6, 1992, Harding was led into the gas chamber at Arizona State Prison Complex, Florence. He was the first person to be executed in Arizona in nearly 30 years. He wore prison-issued blue pants and a light blue shirt. Strapped to the metal chair, he declined to make a lengthy statement. His final words were simple: "I deserve this." Then, the cyanide pellets were dropped into a vat beneath his seat. Witnesses described the scene in clinical detail. Harding's chest heaved. His body convulsed. Mucus and saliva foamed from his mouth. The violent struggle lasted over 10 minutes, while the chamber remained sealed tight. Medical staff watched, powerless to intervene. According to one witness, it was horrific. No one could say that was humane. His last meal, consumed the day before, consisted of steak, fried chicken, French fries, and ice cream, a classic comfort food spread that stood in sharp contrast to the grim ritual that followed. The brutality of Harding's death stunned the nation. Reporters and legal observers wrote extensively about the event. Even those who supported capital punishment questioned whether gas chamber executions could be justified. Within weeks, the state of Arizona announced it would transition to lethal injection as its sole method of execution. Donald Harding's execution became a turning point. While he had shown no mercy in life, his death helped reshape how the justice system administers capital punishment. In the words of one Arizona official, "Whatever you think about Donald Harding, no one who saw what happened in that chamber came away unchanged." Robert Alton Harris, California. In the heart of California's prison system, at San Quentin State Prison, a chapter in American legal history came to a close in the spring of 1992. It concerned one man, Robert Alton Harris, a figure whose crimes and final moments would echo far beyond the walls of his death chamber. Born in 1953, Harris's early life was steeped in hardship. Raised in a deeply troubled household, he endured a childhood marked by violence and instability. Both his parents struggled with alcoholism, and young Robert was frequently subjected to beatings. By adolescence, he had entered a cycle of petty crimes and institutional confinement, his life already spiraling. But the events that would define him occurred on a single day, July 5, 1978. On that summer morning in San Diego, two teenage boys, John Majewski and Michael Baker, both 16, were on their way to a local fast food restaurant. They never returned. Harris, then 25, abducted them at gunpoint. For reasons known only to him, he drove them to a secluded area, ordered them out of the car, and shot them both at close range. What followed was especially chilling. Harris took the boys' fast food order from the car, hamburgers, fries, and soft drinks, and ate it himself while sitting near their still warm bodies. Captured shortly afterward, he confessed to the crime and was convicted of double murder. He was sentenced to death, but the execution would not come swiftly. For 14 years, Harris sat on death row. During that time, his case became a lightning rod for debate, testing the boundaries of legal appeals, procedural delays, and the morality of the death penalty itself. His execution was postponed 9 times, the final time on the very day it was scheduled. It was not until April 21, 1992, that the state of California moved forward with the sentence. He would be the first person executed in California since 1967, marking the end of a 25-year moratorium. That morning, Robert Alton Harris was escorted into the gas chamber at San Quentin. The chamber, metallic and clinical, had long been dormant. Now it stirred with purpose once again. Before his execution, Harris consumed a large and indulgent final meal. A bucket of KFC chicken, 2 large pizzas, and ice cream. It was not a feast of reflection, but one of appetite, perhaps one final assertion of control in a life so often dictated by others. Strapped into the steel chair, Harris was calm. As the cyanide gas began to fill the chamber, he spoke his final words. "You can be a king or a street sweeper, but everybody dances with the Grim Reaper." They were taken from the 1991 film Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. An unusual choice, one that left witnesses uncertain whether it was irony, defiance, or acceptance. What followed was clinical and yet distressing. The gas filled the air. Harris inhaled. His breathing quickened, muscles tensed. Witnesses noted he appeared to lose consciousness within a minute, but his heart would not stop for several more. The delays on execution day, caused by last-minute legal appeals, extended for hours. The U.S. Supreme Court intervened and lifted the final stay just 6 minutes before the gas pellets dropped. The court's involvement on that level, so late in the process, was nearly unprecedented. Harris's death became not only a personal reckoning, but a national event. News outlets covered it in detail. Protesters gathered outside. The case sparked fresh arguments about the fairness, cruelty, and effectiveness of the death penalty in modern America. David Edwin Mason, California. Born in 1956, Mason's early life was marred by instability. Reports from his youth describe a childhood marked by neglect and violence. He was in and out of juvenile institutions by his teens, and as he entered adulthood, his violent impulses had begun to escalate. Over the course of a single year, Mason murdered 4 elderly neighbors in the building where he lived. Each victim was targeted inside their own home. Their causes of death varied. Some were strangled, others bludgeoned, but the pattern was unmistakable. The killer lived among them, moved among them. He was one of their own. What distinguished these murders was not only the vulnerability of the victims, but Mason's calculated concealment. After each killing, he made efforts to clean up, to erase traces, to maintain a facade of normalcy. For a time it worked, but eventually the evidence mounted. Neighbors grew suspicious, and Mason, it seemed, no longer cared to hide. After his arrest, Mason confessed. In chilling detail, he described the killings and the motives or lack thereof. He also admitted to robbing his victims, often taking only a few dollars. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. Yet the story did not end there. While housed on death row at San Quentin State Prison, Mason committed another murder. His cellmate, William Dennis, was found dead, strangled with a strip of bedsheet. The act was methodical, deliberate, and entirely without remorse. When asked later why he had done it, Mason replied that Dennis just wouldn't shut up. What followed was unusual in the realm of American capital punishment. Mason, now already sentenced to die, waived all further appeals. He insisted that his execution proceed without delay. His lawyers tried to intervene, arguing that he was mentally unfit. But Mason was unwavering. He wanted to die. And so, in August of 1993, he got his wish. California still maintained its gas chamber at San Quentin, and Mason became one of the last individuals to die by that method. Strapped to a steel chair, clad in light blue prison garb, he declined to request a special meal. There would be no final indulgence, only the finality of the act itself. Moments before the cyanide pellets were dropped, he offered a final, chilling statement: "I am what you made me." A message, it seemed, not for the guards before him, but for the system that had raised, imprisoned, and ultimately destroyed him. As the gas filled the chamber, Mason's breathing became labored, his body convulsed, and after several minutes, he was still. Witnesses, many of whom were reporters, later described the process as grim, prolonged, and deeply unsettling. His execution prompted yet another wave of scrutiny over the gas chamber. And within a year, California ruled that gas executions were unconstitutional, citing cruel and unusual punishment. From that point forward, lethal injection would become the state's sole method of execution. In death, as in life, David Edwin Mason left behind a grim legacy, one marked by violence, defiance, and a haunting reminder of how monsters are sometimes made, not born. Jimmy Lee Gray, Mississippi. In the state of Mississippi, on a quiet September morning in 1983, the gas chamber at Mississippi State Penitentiary, also known as Parchman Farm, was prepared for use for the first time in 2 decades. Its occupant would be Jimmy Lee Gray, a man whose crimes and manner of death would reignite national scrutiny over America's methods of capital punishment. Gray was born in 1948 in the American South. His early life was marked by brushes with the law and a tendency toward violence. By the early 1970s, he had already committed a crime that would put most behind bars for life. In California, Gray was convicted of manslaughter in the death of his 16-year-old girlfriend, a crime for which he served several years. Upon his parole in 1975, he returned to Mississippi. There, only months later, he abducted his 3-year-old niece by marriage, Deressa Jean Scales, took her to a secluded location, sexually assaulted, and murdered her. The act was both brutal and calculated. The victim's small body was found not far from the site of the abduction. The crime shocked the local community. The fact that Gray had only recently been released from prison intensified public outrage. He was swiftly arrested, tried, and sentenced to death in 1977. For the next 6 years, Gray awaited his fate on Mississippi's death row. His appeals were exhausted, and the state made preparations to resume executions for the first time since 1964. On September 2, 1983, Gray consumed his final meal, a cheeseburger and French fries. Simple, unremarkable, and familiar. He was led to the gas chamber later that day. Unlike modern designs, Mississippi's gas chamber was antiquated, constructed in the 1950s and never updated. Inside, the chair was bolted to a steel pole running vertically behind the prisoner's back. No cushioning, no restraint for the head. Once Gray was strapped into place, potassium cyanide pellets were dropped into a vat of sulfuric acid below. The reaction produced a cloud of hydrogen cyanide gas. As the fumes rose, Gray began to gasp for air. What followed left the witnesses visibly shaken. Gray was heard repeatedly crying out, saying, "Help me, help me." He also called for his fiancée again and again. As the gas took hold, Gray began thrashing violently, slamming his head repeatedly against the metal pole behind him. He did this 11 times before he fell unconscious. The spectacle lasted nearly 8 minutes, with observers noting the visible panic and extreme physical response. The scene was so disturbing that the prison official in charge, who was also the timekeeper, fled the room mid-execution. There was no one left to formally pronounce the time of death. Gray's execution became an immediate flashpoint in the national debate over capital punishment. Critics described it as torture masquerading as justice. Within weeks, civil rights attorneys and human rights observers were calling for an end to the gas chamber entirely. Although Mississippi had revived the gas chamber for this execution, it would never use it again. In the years that followed, the state quietly moved to lethal injection, acknowledging the deep ethical concerns raised by Gray's final moments. Today, Jimmy Lee Gray's name is rarely spoken without mention of how he died. His crimes remain horrific, but the circumstances of his death forced a nation to confront an uncomfortable truth, that even in seeking justice, the line between punishment and cruelty can be perilously thin. Walter Lrand, Arizona, in the high-security wing of Arizona State Prison, on the evening of March 3, 1999, history was quietly made. A prisoner named Walter Lrand, a dual national of the United States and Germany, was led into a steel chamber designed for a method of execution now all but extinct. What followed would become a focal point of international scrutiny and the last of its kind in American penal history. Born in 1962, Walter Lrand had emigrated from Germany with his family as a young child. Raised in the United States, he lived most of his life in Tucson, Arizona, where he and his older brother Carl would later become known not for their origins, but for their crime. In 1982, the brothers carried out an armed robbery at a Valley National Bank in the city of Marana. Inside, they took hostages, and when the robbery began to spiral, the violence escalated. The bank's branch manager, Kenneth Hartsock, was stabbed 23 times with a letter opener. He died from the wounds. A second employee was also severely injured but survived. The Lrand brothers fled, but were captured shortly after. They were tried, convicted of first-degree murder, and sentenced to death. For nearly 2 decades, Walter remained on Arizona's death row, housed in the same system that had executed Donald Harding in 1992 by lethal gas, a method already under intense criticism. But unlike most prisoners, Walter Lrand requested the gas chamber rather than lethal injection. His decision, many believed, was both symbolic and political. At the time, there was mounting opposition to gas executions, particularly from the international community. And as a German citizen, Lrand's case quickly drew attention from abroad. German officials argued that he had been denied access to consular support at the time of his arrest, a violation of the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations. In the final days leading up to his execution, urgent appeals came from around the world. The German government protested. The International Court of Justice issued a rare emergency stay. Even the President of the United States was petitioned to intervene. Arizona declined to halt the execution. On the evening of March 3rd, Lrand was served his final meal, a distinctly German spread, a double helping of Wiener Schnitzel, 6 fried eggs, hash browns, and coffee. He consumed it calmly. Just before the execution, Lrand addressed the warden with clarity and resolve. "I'm ready, warden, let's do it." Then, turning his attention beyond the chamber walls, he spoke in his native tongue. "Macht's gut. Ich liebe dich." Take care. I love you. Moments later, sodium cyanide pellets were dropped into a vat of sulfuric acid beneath his seat, releasing hydrogen cyanide gas. As the gas filled the chamber, Lrand began to choke and gasp. His body twisted. The physical reaction, severe and drawn out, was visible to all who watched. It took over 18 minutes for him to die. The image was broadcast in detail to a horrified global audience. Human rights organizations condemned the execution as barbaric. The German Foreign Office issued a formal diplomatic protest. This would be the last time the gas chamber was used in the United States. In the weeks that followed, Arizona, and eventually other states, codified lethal injection as the exclusive method of execution. The chamber at Florence, where Lrand died, remains unused. Walter Lrand's death was not only a conclusion to a criminal case, it was the end of an era. A final, undeniable display of the gas chamber's cruelty, witnessed on the world stage, and ultimately cast into history. The gas chamber was once seen as a modern alternative to hanging and the electric chair, but the reality was far from humane. These inmates may have committed horrific crimes, but their final moments raise enduring questions about justice, punishment, and mercy. Their last meals reflect human hunger. Their final words echo pain, regret, or chilling indifference. If these stories moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more true crime content. Which story stuck with you the most? Let us know in the comments. And as always, stay safe and stay curious. Thanks for watching. More haunting stories are just around the corner.